Storytelling and as guide to enhance the understanding of self-honesty. So yesterday I was having a chat with Lindsay, and in the feedback, because while I'm talking to her I'm obviously cross-referencing herself, all the people she connects to and her buddies, to check out the movement of information, and we found a discrepancy. So we're going to use this discrepancy to explain the practical implication of self-honesty, or being honest with yourself, to make sure that one understands what is meant by self-honesty within the context of equality and oneness. So let's first define it. The definition of self-honesty is that you want to be so specific about the root of every point within space-time that if you have to swap places with another person, there will be no discrepancy. They will have exactly the same information that you have, and you will have thus a position of complete trust that is existing, and that you do not then share stories according to your understanding or in a form that it may be look like self-glorification. Therefore, if you learn something from someone, then you name the point accordingly. So in this particular situation, the message that Rozelle gave Lindsay was that she got back to process through her own power more than anything else. So the message was not clear of how she ended up in the process back, and therefore an idea was formed about it by Lindsay, and the idea was based on Rozelle not being specific as to the exact events that took place in space-time that made it possible for her to be back in process. So the point that Lindsay then misunderstood is that Rozelle was back in process through her own power, when in fact it wasn't so. So that point would then be self-glorification. You will lose the trust of the person if you do things like that. Therefore we're correcting the point now so that this is clear, but also so that others can understand that when you are doing something, or you are talking something, or you are referencing something, be specific as to the actuality that made it possible for you to change. Because if you give the incorrect way of change and you do not reference the actual way, the next person cannot learn from you. They're going to try to do your glorified way, and thus they're going to fail, lose trust in what you're saying, because it doesn't bring about the result, because you didn't give them in fact the way that you changed. You gave them the way you want them to believe you have changed. You have created a religion in a way. So in the particular point was that Rozelle did not come back to process out of her own power. She in fact was going the other way, and she received a phone call, and the phone call assessed the situation and then offered her a way back in. The only thing she had to do was decide whether she will come back in or not, which in itself requires obviously her own directive point. So, all clear on what is the importance of self-honesty and why one reference something. If you have come to a particular realization, and that realization was because you heard about a particular interview, something that was said, you do not reference that, but you then walk on the point that you have self-realized, and the point isn't clear as to why and how. The next person is going to follow your direction, which is not in fact direction, because it's not specific, and the next person is going to fall, and you will not be able to help another person because you're trying to sell them your religion instead of the space-time facts. So make sure that whenever you do self-honesty, whenever you are sharing your story, that you share in fact the process of self-realization and not your glorification of your self-realization. Because if you share glorification, that is enlightenment, that's the great light thing, then you are blind to the truth. If you share the in fact process, you actually will normally find that you are rather small in the picture and other events around it is much bigger. That's why, for instance, within the process with the portal and so on, the important point was to have an in fact cross-reference, thus, so that the story shared is the in fact events, not a glorification. That's why we haven't shared much of it, because the in fact events of things are rather simplistic, and as we go along we will share more of the in fact events so one can understand how existence actually operate. The interesting thing is though is that when you get to the same position, you will see that it is in fact what we have shared, absolutely exact, and not an interpretation or a glorification of anything. It is how things in fact exist. That is the purpose and the point of self-honesty.
A couple times during the interview, I was like, but I did know. But because you didn't say it in that story, it kind of like...
Yeah, it's interpretation. Okay, well, specifics. Yeah.
Okay, so in this case, understand, as you've just noticed what happened, you immediately went into a defense of yourself.
Yeah.
If you look at the eyes, you'll see the eyes is like shiny. That's a resonant reaction to the point. So if you look at the eyes, you'll see they're also like not fully here. They are in a state of tension. So what one must realize is there's no point to defend yourself. You immediately go to self-correction, where you say, okay, I accept that I have not been specific enough, and you immediately make sure that the point is specific enough. Next point is also that the person telling the story must be specific. That is why we record everything at Desteni and we publish it, so that if you have to go to the original recording or the original publication to check and verify the message of Desteni, because in this world you have many that wants to glorify themselves, and in many cases, strange enough, glorification is a form of hate. The hate is to talk somebody down to try and lift yourself up, which you have seen demonstrations of extensively. And we have indicated through the years very clearly that everything we do is in fact published and is therefore verifiable. So the message of Desteni must be cross-checked with the original recordings to make sure you have in fact the facts. The reason why the Desteni message is not one that is glorified, that means one that will make it more interesting than what it is, and why people will find so much, oh, but it's so slow, the message, or the message is, you're not saying anything great and grand. We don't, because we give you the exact slice of existence that the recording represents in that particular moment. Cross-reference, checked by everyone in existence while it's happening, to make sure that everyone can stand at that point for eternity. On earth we have the problem of self-glorification. That is what we're busy showing, so that one can stop that and actually get to the point of taking responsibility, making sure that the transfer of the story, the event, is in fact space-time based, exact. Then you have self-honesty. That's the point of self-honesty, is to make sure at all times we eventually, through correcting existence to the original space-time existence that it should be, where everyone is equal with all the information and knowledge, we're busy with that correction. Somebody comes and gives you a glorified story that you can't go and cross-reference in space-time, in fact, problem. So therefore here, If you hear something about destiny, you have to, as proof of your self-honesty, go and cross-reference the information with the original recordings. That recording is absolute and in its context and in its self-honesty. If you change that, you're the one that is deceiving yourself. Or if you believe somebody that's changed that into their own story, you're still the one that deceives yourself, and you're still the one that allows another to deceive you, because you're not checking and cross-referencing the original exactness of it. You'll see a lot of this deception going on in the world now, to such an extent that there is virtually nothing you'll be able to believe. I mean, the Revelations explain the context of deception in the latter days, and we are now in the past the latter days, we're now in the last days. The latter days are something that is more predictive. The last days is what is actually happening. So be self-honest. Be honest with yourself and have a look at this world, at the exact nature of how it works. And then listen to the Destiny message, and you're going to find that we are in fact giving you a solution to the problem.